Good evening, my nighttime historians. Welcome to today's episode of Boring History for Sleep. I'm very glad you're here. Today, we're journeying east across vast plains and snow-capped mountains into the heart of the 13th century, where survival was earned with tenacity and mercy was as rare as a quiet sky. We're diving into the world of the Mongol Empire. As always, let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you. Wrap up warmly, settle in, and let your mind drift to the wind-swept steppe. Today, you'll learn why you wouldn't have lasted a day in the Mongol Empire. Let's begin. The Mongolian steppe was not a place that welcomed strangers, nor did it tolerate weakness. It was a land that bred a specific type of human, hardened by wind, shaped by cold, and sharpened by scarcity. Stretching from the arid plains of Central Asia to the foothills of the Altai Mountains, the steppe was vast and unforgiving. There were no cities to defend against the elements, no stone walls to cradle a fragile body in safety, only a rolling sea of grass, flattened by the hooves of thousands of horses and the endless sky overhead. There were no trees to break the wind, no rivers that flowed gently, and no valleys to hide in from the sun or the snow. The landscape felt like a living indifference, and to live in it was to be in a constant dialogue with death. The seasons here were not balanced. Winter came with a severity and lingered, dropping temperatures enough to freeze a man to death before he could saddle his horse. Winds blew with a fury that scoured flesh from bone, and storms arrived without warning, blanketing the world in snow deep enough to bury the bones of the dead. In summer, the earth didn't turn soft. Instead, the sun scorched the plains until they cracked, and the only shade was the one you could make with your own body. Sandstorms carried entire clouds of dust that burned the lungs and blinded the eyes. It was said that those who could endure the weather of the steppe were tougher than the warriors they fought. And in the Mongol Empire, that was high praise indeed. The land was endless. It stretched in every direction, a boundless sea of grass rippling beneath a sky so immense and unbroken that men believed it touched the edge of heaven. This was the steppe. This was the cradle of the Mongol people, and the forge from which the fiercest empire the world had ever known would rise. It was a place of stark contrasts, where life clung to hardship with the same tenacity that the wind clung to the hides of the yurts. There were no stone cities, no great libraries. Civilization, as known in the West, or the distant courts of China, was not born here. Instead, there were herds of sheep and goats, wild horses running the plains, and people who lived on horseback as easily as they breathed. In this world of motion and survival, people carried their homes on carts, their stories in memory, and their gods in the sky. The Mongols and the many other tribes who roamed the steppe before the empire's formation believed that the heavens watched them. They did not worship carved idols. Their sacred was the eternal blue sky, called Tengri, the divine presence as vast and quiet, as pervasive as the wind that bent the grasses. Tengri did not make demands like earthly kings. It simply was, endless and powerful, granting favor to the strong and punishing the weak with indifference. Under its gaze, clans lived and died, hunted, grazed, warred, and migrated in ancient cycles. Their lives were shaped by the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought calving and pasture renewal. Summer demanded long migrations. Autumn required preparation. Winter brought hardship, starvation, and snow deep enough to bury the bones of the dead. There were no borders. The land belonged to no one, though it was constantly fought over. Authority in the steppe came not from ownership, but from strength. A man was known not by what he built, but by what he could take and defend. Wealth was measured in livestock and allegiance. A chieftain could command 10,000 men in the morning and die alone in the snow by night. Alliances were forged in marriage and shattered in betrayal. Feuds were deep, sometimes spanning generations. And yet, for all its cruelty, the steppe was also a place of extraordinary freedom. There were no kings with gold crowns to levy taxes. There were no iron chains to bind the poor to the earth. A man could rise by the merit of his courage and the sharpness of his blade. Reputation was currency, and honor, though often soaked in blood, mattered more than coin or rank. It was a world of continuous motion.
Before the iron heel of empire left its mark across Asia and Europe, the Mongol lands were a patchwork of blood, kinship, betrayal, and ancient pride. The steppe did not belong to a single people. It was a chessboard of shifting alliances and rival chieftains, raids and retaliation, where memory was long and vengeance never slept. Every tribe saw itself as chosen, the descendant of noble ancestors. Among them were the Tatars, the Merkit, the Khanates, the Naiman, the Ongud, and the Mongols themselves, who in those days were fractured into countless clans and disunited families. Each name carried with it a history of triumph and humiliation, of forgotten wounds. The Tatars were the most prominent in those early centuries, feared and respected across the eastern steppe. They were the puppets of the Great Khitan and then the Jin dynasty of North China, who used them as a buffer and a sword against the other tribes. Their name became synonymous with treachery. Yet they could not withstand the waves of change when they turned. The Tatars would fall to a fury of vengeance that began in childhood. To the west lay the Merkit, proud and predatory, known for their swift raids and fierce defense of their herds. Their society was deeply bound by custom, and they hated to bow to any outsider. Their blood feud with Temujin's family, born of a stolen bride and an act of violence, would become one of the most bitter and significant rivalries in steppe history. The Khanates were more complex. This was a Christian tribe, followers of Nestorian Christianity, brought centuries earlier. Unlike their neighbors, they carried crosses into battle and erected churches of wood and felt among their yurts. Their Khan maintained correspondence with both Eastern and Western rulers. Their leader, Togrul, often called Wang Khan, would become a key figure in Genghis Khan's early life, a father figure who turned rival, a king undone by pride and the shifting winds of war. The Khanates were powerful, cultured, and doomed to splinter under the weight of ambition. Then there were the Naiman, perhaps the most formidable of all. Their lands stretched across the western steppe, rich in pasture and trade routes. They were numerous, literate, and proud of their nobility. Their rulers styled themselves as kings in the old manner, with advisors, scribes, and large camps that mimicked the courts of the settled world. For years they resisted Mongol expansion with both the sword and the treaty. And among all these tribes, who were both feared and ignored, were the Mongols themselves. In those days, the word Mongol referred not so much to a single people, but to a loose collection of clans and families, speaking a similar language and grazing in the same vast regions. They were not yet a nation. They had no king, no capital, no flag. Their name was often used with contempt, a name associated with poverty and disunity. The Mongols quarreled more among themselves than with outsiders, locked into feuds that passed from father to son like a curse. The Taichud, the Jadaran, the Uriankai, and the Borjigin were all Mongol clans, all fighting for dominance, all unwilling to yield even a single yurt's worth of pasture. It was in this fragmented chaos that a leader would have to rise, not just by conquest, but from the very heart of betrayal and privation.
The structure of tribal life was both simple and brutal. Every tribe was led by a Khan, whose authority rested entirely on his ability to command allegiance and deliver success. Children learned to ride before they could properly walk. Boys trained with bows and hunted, still calling for their mothers in the dark. Girls learned to tend animals, gather herbs, and manage the camp while the men were at war. Women were not ornaments to be hidden or bound. On the steppe, they rode, they fought, and they governed when the men were gone or dead. Life permitted no weakness. Every mouth had to pull its weight, and every person had to be ready to kill or be killed. The only defense was speed. The only law was vengeance. Mercy was a luxury for the dead. It is into this fragmented chaos that the story of Temujin is born.
There were no thrones passed by blood without challenge. A Khan who lost a battle often lost his head. Authority was fluid, dependent on strength, charisma, and marriage. Daughters were currency. Sons were pawns in the deadly games of alliance. Kinship mattered, but so did courage and cunning. Slaves could become generals, while the sons of Khans could be cast out and forgotten. Power was earned and maintained by constant vigilance. One mistake, one failed hunt, or one hasty decision could shatter a dynasty. War between the tribes was seasonal, inevitable, and deeply personal. Livestock was stolen, yurts were burned, herds were scattered. Winners took captives, often women and children, and raised them as their own or kept them as trophies. Blood feuds were common, remembered not in parchment but in songs and scars. A warrior whose father died in an ambush would ride for years, nursing vengeance. Yet it would be wrong to see the tribes as merely savage. They had traditions, laws, and a deep sense of identity. They held festivals, honored ancestors, told epic tales of heroes and gods. Their horses were adorned with bells and ribbons for great ceremonies. The fate of generations could be decided over a single shared bowl of kumis. The steppe did not await a conqueror. It resisted unity, absorbed ambition, and rewarded those who embraced its chaos. But beneath its surface, old orders were crumbling. A boy was born beneath a sky thick with storm clouds, a sky that seemed to heave with the weight of unwritten history. His mother named him Temujin, after a Tatar warrior his father had defeated in battle. There was no royal cradle, no written prophecy. There was only the sound of wind through the grasses and the quiet murmur of women inside a felt yurt. Yet the moment was heavy with portents. A clot of blood in the boy's fist was taken by elders as a mark of greatness, a brand from the eternal blue sky, Tengri. In time, that blood would prove to be the first of many. Temujin's father was Yasuge, a chieftain of the Borjigin clan, a minor leader among the Mongol people. It was he who had abducted Hoylan, Temujin's mother, from another tribe, carrying her away from a Merkit camp. This act, common enough on the steppe, would haunt the lives of her children for years to come. The Merkit would not forget the insult. Temujin grew up among his siblings, learning to ride, shoot a bow, and listen to the old stories. His mother, Hoylan, was a woman of fierce pride and unyielding strength. She taught her children the value of resilience. She told them never to beg, never to break, and never to forget. Her love was not gentle. It was carved from privation and wrapped in iron. She held the family together, even as the world began to fall apart. While Temujin was still a boy, barely old enough to draw a bowstring, his father was poisoned. Yasuge shared a meal with a group of Tatars, unaware that some among them nursed an old grievance against him. He died in agony.
When the news reached the camp, the fragile protection surrounding Temujin's family shattered like frost under a hoof. The other clans turned away. Servants who had once bowed to Yasuge now abandoned Hoylan and her children. The camp was stripped down to the bone. Left with nothing but bones and grief, they were driven into the wilderness, left to starve among the rocks and the frost. In those years, Temujin learned what it meant to starve. He trapped rodents and dug for roots in the cold earth. He stole scraps of meat and watched his younger brothers cry with empty stomachs. There were nights when the wind itself seemed to mock them. And yet, through it all, Hoylan kept them alive. She made sure they remembered who they were. Not orphans, not beggars, but the children of a warrior, the inheritors of a past that was not yet erased. Temujin hardened in those years, not cruel, but quiet and watchful. He did not forget the faces of those who turned his mother away. He did not forgive the kinsmen who took his father's herds and offered nothing in return. He spoke little, but listened much. He watched how power moved, how people followed strength, how oaths were made and broken with a smile. He learned that survival was not merely strength. It was the understanding of when to kneel and when to strike. It was the patience that waits through storms and snow, stalking like a falcon before the kill. Even among his own brothers, conflict brewed. His half-brother, Bechter, the eldest and arrogant, tried to assert dominance over the family. He hoarded food, claimed rights beyond his due, and ignored Hoyland's counsel. One day, the tension snapped. Temujin and his younger brother, Kasar, ambushed Bechter and killed him. It was a brutal act, born of desperation and a fierce sense of justice. Temujin's life continued as a series of harsh lessons. He was captured by the Tai Chud, his father's clan enemies, and held in slavery. They fitted him with a wooden collar and forced him to labor in their camps. But even in chains, he made allies. He remembered faces. He gauged loyalty. And when the moment came, he escaped with the help of a sympathetic herdsman. The experience did not break him. It forged him. He returned to his mother with a new knowledge. The world was not governed by fate alone. It was governed by the will of those who understood how to sway others to their side. Entering manhood, Temujin began to gather followers, not through wealth, which he did not possess, nor through a weakened bloodline, but through loyalty. He remembered the boys who stood with him in starvation, the warriors who saw in him not a chieftain's son, but a leader shaped by suffering. He made alliances sealed with blood and oath, not gold. He found blood brothers, most famously Jamukha, whose friendship would later sour into betrayal. He forged a small but devoted band. The tribe still did not see him as a threat. He was the ghost of a fallen family. But the steppe had changed him. He no longer believed in waiting for justice from fate. He saw that the strong could take, and that the weak could lose, and he resolved that he would never be the latter again. Temujin's rise was slow, a deliberate walk on unsteady ground. He had no wealth or large herds. What he had was clarity. He grasped what few others did. The world was changing. The old way of clan loyalty above all else would collapse under the weight of ambition. He wouldn't rule through ancestors. He would rule through trust, through law, and through the bonds of men who chose each other. One of the first of these bonds was with Jamukha, a boy of noble lineage, charismatic and with blood ties to powerful Mongol houses. In childhood, Temujin and Jamukha grew close. They hunted together, shared meat and fire, and spoke in the silence of the steppe as only spirit brothers, Onda, could. They swore the ancient oath of Mongol blood brotherhood, Onda, a pact deeper than kinship,
stronger than clan allegiance. In the eyes of the eternal blue sky, they became one soul divided between two bodies. For a time, this bond gave them strength. Together they gathered young warriors from scattered families, from smaller clans, from the dispersed and the daring. A new community began to grow on the open plains, not bound by blood, but by freely given loyalty. Temujin wasn't like the other chieftains. Where they ruled with arrogance and assumed obedience, he listened. He rewarded skill. He promoted those who earned their place, regardless of their birth. A blacksmith's son could ride beside him in battle. A servant could rise to the rank of general. This merit, this fairness in a world governed by cruelty was intoxicating. The people who were stepped on by the strong came to him. They brought their wives, their children, their loyalty. And with every soul who joined his growing camp, Temujin's vision took shape. He wasn't building a clan, he was building a nation. But change attracts enemies. As Temujin rose, the old powers of the steppe turned their eyes upon him. The Tayachud, the Tatars, the Naiman, the Khanates, each watched with unease a man of no great birth who began gathering warriors and speaking of unity. To them, he was a threat, an upstart with dangerous ideas. Temujin's methods insulted their pride. He took servants and made them commanders. He forgave the sons of enemies if they proved loyal. He gave authority to women and to outsiders. His ascent undermined everything the old chieftains held sacred. But Temujin wasn't building for their approval. He was building for victory. Friction began to form between him and Jamukha. Though they were once Andas, their visions of power diverged. Jamukha, with his noble blood and aristocratic manner, believed in the old customs. He gathered the traditional elite around him, those who clung to titles and lineages. Temujin, by contrast, attracted a different sort of follower. People of the grass, people who had suffered, people who believed that strength and justice should guide a leader's hand. For a time, the two leaders maneuvered around their differences, but the steppe could not hold two sons forever. The final break came not with words, but with war. In 1187, the two former brothers turned their camps against each other, and the Mongol world began to choose sides. Jamukha had the greater numbers, 30,000 warriors drawn from the old houses. Temujin had only 20,000, but they were loyal, hardened, and disciplined in ways the traditional armies were not. They fought at the river Dalan Baljut, where the land rolled in waves and the grass was stained with the blood of the future. They met in battle for a day and a night, arrows whistling through the air, horses screaming. At first, Temujin's lesser force held steady, maneuvering with skill, but the numbers had their say. By the second day, Jamukha's forces overwhelmed them. The defeat was crushing. Jamukha captured many of Temujin's men, and in a display of cruelty designed to instill terror, he boiled 70 young warriors alive. It was a horror that burned itself into memory. Yet even in defeat, Temujin's legend grew. His men remembered his courage, his loyalty, his refusal to abandon them in defeat. They returned to him when the dust settled. Others came, drawn by his resilience, his refusal to die, his promise of a new order. Jamukha may have won the battle, but Temujin began to win the future. In the years that followed, Temujin focused not on revenge, but on rebuilding. He strengthened his forces, renewed old alliances, and continued to rule with an iron sense of justice. He imposed order where none existed. Theft was punished, even if it committed by his closest allies. Cowardice in battle was scorned. Every decision, every action was designed to show that the new world he envisioned would be governed by law, not by caprice. When the time was right, Temujin moved against the Tatars, the people who had poisoned his father. It wasn't just a campaign, it was an act of historical justice. He crushed them with calculated fury, destroyed their leaders, and absorbed their people into his own.
The steppe had never seen such a campaign, one that blended conquest with transformation. Tribes ceased to be separate. They were becoming Mongol. The steppe had never known unity. It was a land of blood feuds and tribal pride. And yet Temujin, born in exile and obscurity, began to accomplish what centuries of warriors and prophets had failed to do. He didn't try to imitate the old ways. He broke them. In the years after the defeat at Dalan Baljut, Temujin worked not to recover pride, but to create a foundation. He traveled from camp to camp, not with threats, but with promises. He promised protection from raiders. He promised a peace where a poor herdsman could rise by valor and where a slave son could become a commander. He demanded loyalty, but in return, he gave stability. The tribal chieftains scorned this vision. They saw it as heresy, a betrayal of the old customs. For centuries, the Mongols and their neighbors lived by an ancient code of tribal autonomy. Temujin's insistence on a single law, a single ruler, a single system of justice threatened to erase the very fabric of their identity. The resistance grew. Temujin struck first, not with fire, but with order. He began to restructure his forces. Warriors were no longer grouped by clan. Instead, he divided his followers into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Each was led by commanders appointed by merit. Brothers were separated. Clans were fragmented by design. Allegiance was no longer to the lineage, but to the unit leader, and above them, to Temujin himself. For the first time in steppe history, an army was built on discipline, not inheritance. He didn't stop with the military. He began to draft laws, rules designed to govern everything from theft and murder to the treatment of captives and the duties of soldiers. This growing body of custom would later be known as the Yassa, the living code, said to be delivered from the eternal blue sky, though in reality it came from Temujin's uncompromising understanding of justice and his memory of every betrayal. The Yassa demanded loyalty, service, and discipline. It outlawed the abduction of women, an ancient and common practice. These laws were enforced with swift, often brutal punishment. But they created something the tribes had never known, a sense of shared identity. The opposition to this new order coalesced around familiar enemies, the Merkit, the Naiman, and the remnants of the Tatars. Even the Khanates, once Temujin's strongest allies, began to feel uneasy. Wang Khan Togrul had once treated Temujin as a son, but now looked upon his former protege with rising suspicion. The boy had grown into a man, and that man was gathering more power than was proper for a subordinate. When Jamukha returned from exile to join the resistance, the scene was set for a civil war on the scale the Mongols had never seen. The years between 1190 and 1204 were soaked in blood. Temujin acted swiftly, destroying the Tatars with a fury honed by the memory of his father's murder. His break with Togrul came next. The Khanates could not accept their ally becoming their rival. Togrul was defeated and killed while attempting to flee. The Khanates were scattered, their land seized, and their warriors absorbed into Temujin's ranks. With each victory, his power grew not just in numbers, but in authority. He no longer had to beg for allegiance. Chieftains came to him by choice, or they vanished. The final confrontation came again with Jamukha, the blood brother turned enemy. Jamukha again declared himself Gur Khan, a title of ancient prestige, meaning universal ruler. He sought to rally the old order against the revolution Temujin had unleashed. But the ground had shifted. By 1204, their armies met again. This time, Temujin's forces, better organized and more cohesive, carried the day. Jamukha fled, was betrayed and delivered into the hands of the man he once called brother. Temujin did not rush his execution. He offered him mercy, even a place beside him. Jamukha refused. He said 2 eagles could not share the same sky. He asked for a noble death, and Temujin granted it. At that moment, the last great rival of the steppe fell, and Temujin stood alone, not merely as a conqueror, but as the unifier. The tribal order was broken. The laws of the old steppe, where every chieftain was king of his own yurt, were replaced by something new. The Mongol people, for the first time, were not just a scattered collection of families. They became a nation. In 1206, at a great assembly by the Onon River, the Kurultai, of all the tribes, they crowned Temujin not as a chieftain, but as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, a man blessed by the eternal blue sky to lead his people. The title was not ceremonial. It was a declaration of transformation. The Mongol tribes had become the Mongol Empire, and the world, though it did not yet know it, was about to tremble. In 1206, on the wide green banks of the Onon River, beneath the open dome of the eternal blue sky, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan. It was a moment centuries in the making, the final stitch in a tapestry woven from betrayal, resilience, and blood. The assembled tribes, once sworn to destroy each other, now knelt in recognition of a single ruler. The ceremony was more than a coronation. It was a transfiguration. Temujin had not merely won battles. He had dismantled the ancient order of the steppe and remade it in his image. The boy who once snared marmots for food and slept in the snow was now the sovereign of all Mongols. And now, having forged a people out of fragments, he turned his gaze outward, toward the world beyond the steppe. The Mongol Empire was not born with cities or temples. It had no palaces, no written history, no silver coin bearing his founder's image. It was built on the backs of horses and the weight of loyalty. Genghis Khan understood that if his rule was to outlast his life, he needed more than victories. He needed a system. An empire, even one that rode on horseback, could not hold together on charisma alone. It had to be formed, not merely conquered. So, he began to create the framework of a nation. His first and greatest tool was the military. This was not an army in the manner of the kingdoms to the west or the dynasties to the south. It was a living machine, forged from discipline, fear, and reward. It was organized into precise units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 men. Each had its leader, and each leader owed his position to merit, not blood. Brothers were placed in different units. Clans were deliberately fragmented. This broke the old tribal loyalty and created a new one that flowed only upward to Genghis Khan himself. The soldiers trained relentlessly, practicing maneuvers that allowed them to move with the precision of dancers. Communication was fast and complex, managed by flags, drums, and relay riders on horseback. When the Mongol army moved, it did so as a single unit, and when it struck, it did so without warning. Their weapon was the composite bow, a marvel of engineering made of horn, wood, and sinew. It could pierce armor at 200 yards, and Mongol archers could shoot it with deadly accuracy from a horse running at full gallop. Every warrior carried several bows, along with a curved saber, a lasso, and often a spear. They were trained from childhood to ride without a saddle and stirrups, controlling their horses with their knees, freeing both hands for the bow. They could simulate retreat to draw enemies into an ambush. No army in the world could match their speed. Genghis Khan knew that strength alone would not hold an empire together. He needed to bind his people not just by fear, but by identity. He expanded and codified the Yassa, a code of laws that governed every aspect of life under his authority. Theft, adultery, desertion, and treason were punished with swift death. But alongside these brutal orders were protective measures. Religious freedom was enshrined. The poor were spared excessive taxation. Even the environment was protected, with strict limitations placed on hunting during breeding seasons. The Yassa was not fully written down, but it was memorized and strictly enforced. It became the invisible spine of the empire, holding together a population that ranged from mountain herdsmen to conquered scholars and merchants. He reformed the aristocracy, replacing hereditary titles with appointed ranks. His most trusted generals were men who were once his enemies, men who were once slaves, and men who walked in chains. He placed women in influential positions, relying on his mother, Hoylan, and wife, Berte, to counsel, and giving leadership roles to daughters and daughters-in-law. In a world where women were often treated as chattel, Genghis Khan gave them a voice not out of charity, but because he saw the strength of women in hardship. Communication was critical to holding his vast territory. To that end, he created the yam, a postal system that stretched across the steppes and beyond. Relay stations were built at set intervals, each stocked with fresh horses and riders. Messages, orders, and intelligence could travel across the empire faster than any other civilization managed. These posts also served as lodging for travelers and officials, creating a network of safe passage that would soon benefit merchants, ambassadors, and spies. The roads of the Mongol Empire would carry more than just soldiers. They would carry the future. As his influence grew, so did his ambition. The steppe was unified, but beyond it lay kingdoms that had once looked upon the Mongols with scorn. The Jin dynasty in northern China, the Khwarezm Shah in Central Asia, all seemed ripe for conquest. Genghis Khan was utterly convinced that the eternal blue sky had chosen him to govern the world. This was neither metaphor nor conceit. It was a truth he carried as deeply as his sword. He never forgot betrayal. He never stopped preparing for rebellion. He rotated his generals, kept spies within his ranks, and maintained a brutal system of discipline. Entire families were punished for the crimes of individuals. Cities were leveled to the ground to send a message. Mercy was offered once. Disobedience was punished absolutely. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was policy. Genghis Khan understood that fear traveled faster than diplomacy. By 1206, the steppe was transformed beyond recognition. What was once a wasteland of scattered camps was now a military machine. The land south of the steppe had long been a separate world. China, ancient and vast, was always both a prize and a threat. The Jin dynasty, ruling the northern half of China, was not merely a kingdom. It was a huge bureaucratic machine with armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The Jin emperors ruled from their capital, Zhengdu, modern Beijing. Yet Genghis Khan saw something else beneath the marble and the silk. He saw weakness. He saw corruption. The campaign began not with a declaration, but a provocation. The Jin had played a cautious game with the steppe for years, encouraging rivalry among the tribes. But Genghis Khan had broken their game. He unified the tribes and now demanded to be treated not as a tool of foreign policy, but as an equal sovereign. The Jin court responded with contempt. They dismissed him as a barbarian chieftain and executed his envoys, an act of arrogance that would prove fatal. In 1211, the Mongol horde invaded Jin territory not as raiders, but as an army of conquest. Their numbers were smaller than the Jin armies, but their movement was fluid. The Mongols swept through the northern defenses, taking border fortresses with terrifying efficiency.
They broke lines with volleys of arrows, retreated with feigned cowardice, and then returned, like wolves, to annihilate those who pursued. Genghis Khan did not rely solely on Mongol skill. He hired Chinese and Muslim engineers, experts in siege warfare, who constructed trebuchets, catapults, and siege towers. No city was safe behind stone. The Mongols learned quickly, adapted without pride, and crushed resistance without mercy. Cities that surrendered were spared. Cities that resisted were destroyed. Their inhabitants slaughtered, their walls leveled. The message was simple and deliberate. Obedience brought survival. Defiance brought oblivion. By 1213, the Mongol armies reached the Great Walls. The Jin court, desperate, tried to buy peace with gold, but Genghis Khan did not come for tribute. He came for justice, for vengeance, and for conquest. He bypassed the strongest fortifications, using mountain passes and lesser-known roads, striking at the softer underbelly of the empire. The Jin generals, more skilled in court ceremonies than in field command, failed to anticipate the speed and precision of the Mongol advance. Then came the fall of the outer cities. Refugees flooded into Zhengdu, carrying tales of slaughter and desperation. But it was already too late. The Mongols encircled Zhengdu, Beijing, in 1215. They cut off its supplies, harassed its walls day and night, and annihilated anyone who tried to flee. Inside, famine spread. Panic grew. Rumors escalated into riots. The court descended into paranoia and accusation. The Mongols waited. When the walls finally fell, it was not merely a victory, it was a demonstration. Zhengdu was sacked with brutal thoroughness. Its palaces were looted, its streets ran red with blood. The defenders were put to the sword. The city, once the jewel of the Jin realm, was left a broken relic beneath the hooves of a nomadic army that came from a world the court once held beneath its contempt. Genghis Khan did not stay to rule. He left behind governors and commanders, trusted men who would oversee tribute and law, and returned to the steppe to prepare for what came next. Yet he did not leave entirely. He showed the Jin that their walls were meaningless. He left behind a devastation that would echo for decades, and opened a permanent wound in the dynasty's side. Though the Jin dynasty continued to rule for years, their power was broken. Their people no longer believed in the emperor's safety. Their borders were ruined, and throughout the Mongol Empire, the victory became a legend. The conquest of northern China was only the beginning. Genghis Khan had tested the empire he built. He saw it hold under the pressure of siege, terrain, and scale. He saw the loyalty of his commanders proven. He saw that his reforms, his laws, his vision could extend beyond the steppe and sink their teeth into the heart of civilization. And now he knew what lay ahead. There would be no retreat, no return to the old ways. The Mongol Empire had tasted the wealth of the south, and the hunger of empire had only just begun. Following the storm that leveled Zhengdu, the Jin dynasty stood fractured and trembling. What was once a confident regime of mandarins and generals was now a tottering court. Emperor Xuanzong fled the ruined capital, dragging what was left of his court south. The city of Kaifeng became his new seat, though it offered little of the glory or protection Zhengdu once had. The Mongols had not simply seized territory, they had shattered the illusion of permanence. Genghis Khan did not pursue the fleeing emperor with a conqueror's fury bent on finishing the job. Instead, he drew back. This was not due to weakness or fear, but to deliberation.
He never intended to hold every inch of the Jin realm, nor did he have the people to occupy such a vast and populous region. His war was never solely for land. It was for power and recognition, and above all, it was about sending a message. The Mongols came to show the Jin court that the steppe could not be bought or dismissed. To hold the north, Genghis Khan established a system of military governors and tribute collectors. Cities that surrendered were permitted to function with a semblance of autonomy, provided they paid what was demanded. Grain, cloth, gold, weapons, and animals flowed north to feed and equip the Mongol machine. In exchange, peace was offered, but it was the peace of the sword, not diplomacy. Those who wavered were reminded of Zhongdu. Genghis Khan's governance in the occupied territories was pragmatic. He did not attempt to impose Mongol culture on the cities. He did not destroy temples or forbid local languages. He ruled lightly, but with clarity. His emissaries oversaw the collection of tribute. His soldiers patrolled the roads. His name was inscribed on official decrees, and his presence, though distant, became a ghost that haunted every court that dared to contemplate rebellion. He mastered the art of ruling from afar, and the occupied cities were trapped not by chains, but by a web of empire that allowed them to live only as long as they obeyed. Yet the conquest of the north revealed a deeper truth to Genghis Khan and his advisors. The steppe was no longer enough. The nomadic way of life, though still sacred, could not sustain the empire he was building. The riches of the Chinese cities were not simply luxuries, they were necessities. Silk for armor and trade, grain for the armies, iron for weapons, paper for administration. The cities fed the steppe, and the steppe, in turn, provided the horsemen who ensured Mongol rule. This symbiotic link was dangerous, but it was inevitable. Genghis Khan did not attempt to stop it. He adapted. The old idea that a Mongol ruler must forever remain on the pastures began to bend. Permanent administrators were installed in the captured regions. Local elites, once dismissed as decadent, were now hired as scribes and advisors. A new class of mixed governance emerged, where Mongol generals shared authority with Chinese officials. This uneasy partnership became one of the lasting legacies of the conquest. It brought stability, but it also brought change. The Mongols, once the free riders of the open world, began to feel the weight of cities and the complexity of governance. It was not only China that watched this transformation. To the west, in the lands of the Khwarezm Shah, and to the south, where the Song dynasty still held the lower Yangtze, observers took note. The Jin were seen as a powerful buffer. Their weakening opened the floodgates for new ambition and new threats. Rumors of the Mongol armies, fast and ruthless, began to spread along the Silk Road. But Genghis Khan remained clear-sighted. He knew his victories were incomplete. The Jin emperor still lived. The southern provinces remained unbroken. He did not yet have the strength to annihilate them all. His army, though unmatched in skill, was small compared to his enemies. The northern campaign had cost lives, stretched supplies, and extended his forces across unfamiliar terrain. He chose to pause, to let the Jin's wounds fester on their own, and to prepare for larger campaigns elsewhere. With his temporary withdrawal, Genghis Khan revealed another of his many gifts. He knew when to stop. He knew that an empire is not built by endless motion, but by a rhythm. Advance, consolidate, reform, and only then strike again. While his generals managed the north, he returned to the heart of his dominion. Yet even in retreat, he remained in the minds of those he had conquered. The Jin emperor, reduced to a fugitive sovereign living in a crumbling city, lived every day beneath the weight of that absence. It was a silence louder than drums. The threat of Genghis Khan's return became a tool in itself. His enemies prepared for invasions that never came, spending fortunes on walls that would never be tested. Fear became a form of governance, and Genghis Khan wielded it with precision. He did not sit on a jade throne or wear silk-embroidered robes. He had no dragon carved on his walls. Yet, in the minds of millions, he had become the emperor in everything but title. For he had proven that his law, his force, and his vision could not be denied. While the Jin emperor watched his realm shrink, Genghis Khan was preparing not for peace, not for conciliation, but for the next war. The cities of the East had been tested. Now his gaze would fall upon the West, and there too the sky would burn. The victory in the steppe was measured in plunder and songs, but conquest in China came with a different cost. Thousands of horses died during the long months of encircling Zhongdu. Mongol warriors who grew up with the freedom of the pastures now found themselves mired in the cold stone shadow of cities. Disease spread in the tightly packed camps. Arrows flew not across open fields, but between high walls and down the narrow lanes of shattered cities. The enemy was no longer a dispersed horde of steppe riders, but a concentrated force hiding behind massive gates. The way of war had changed, and the warriors themselves had changed. They tasted the wealth of the South and found it both tempting and dangerous. Silk lay in heaps, too soft to protect a man in battle, yet beautiful in the firelight. Gold and jade, once meaningless to men raised on meat and hide, now glittered in their hands. The sons of herdsmen, once hardened by winters without fuel, now feasted on rice and sweet wine. Genghis Khan saw this and understood what it meant. Luxury softens men. Idleness breeds weakness. He permitted no looting without authorization. He punished disorder with death. He reminded his soldiers again and again that they were not conquerors of stone and silk, but riders of the wind, children of the eternal blue sky. The empire must be molded in their image, not surrendered to the comfort of those they defeated. Yet, the transition from nomad to ruler was in full swing. The Mongols, for all their discipline, could not escape the consequences of governance. Administration was required. Tribute needed counting. Roads had to be safe and markets protected from corruption. Genghis Khan appointed governors, many of them Chinese or Turkic, selected for their loyalty and skill, not their ancestry. He drew scribes and accountants into his court. He commanded the building of warehouses and granaries to feed the soldiers and the civilian population under his control. The warrior who once led raids was now managing the logistics of an empire that stretched across deserts and mountains. This was not a conquest that took a few weeks. It was a transformation that would unfold over decades. Among the conquered, discontent festered. The fall of Zhongdu and the devastation of the northern provinces created rivers of refugees. Peasants fled their fields, scholars abandoned their libraries, monks scattered from monasteries. Some became bandits, others became rebels, waiting for the time when the conqueror's hand might falter. The Jin dynasty, though broken, was not yet dead. In the south, it still held fertile lands and standing armies. It still whispered of restoration. The common people bore the heaviest burden. For every city taken by surrender, there were others that resisted, and for them there was no mercy. The Mongol strategy was clear and uncompromising. Resistance brought destruction. Not only soldiers died, but officials, scribes, artisans, even children. Whole cities were reduced to silence. Their names survived only in the chronicles of those who witnessed their end. For the Mongols, this was not cruelty for its own sake. It was policy. Terror was a weapon, sharp as any blade. It traveled faster than the cavalry. It broke resistance before the first arrow flew. In time, it became a legend, and legends rule harder than laws. Yet, for all its horror, the Mongol conquest was not purely a tale of fire. Genghis Khan sought more than destruction. He sought order. In the cities that surrendered, he spared the temples. He protected the merchants. He allowed officials to remain in place if they swore fealty. Trade quickly resumed, and roads once beset by bandits were patrolled with ruthless precision. Markets reopened under new banners. Laws were enforced not by caprice, but by decree. The Yassa stretched over the Chinese countryside not as a foreign imposition, but as a promise of safety to those who accepted its rule. But the balance was fragile. Soldiers longed for the plains. Horses sickened on southern grain. The empire had ridden beyond the horizon of the steppe, and with every step it risked losing the very soul that had given it strength. Genghis Khan knew this. He would not remain in the cities. He returned north, to the grass and the wind, where authority sprang not from marble, but from motion. The campaign against the Jin had opened a door. It had opened the world to the Mongols, not only China, but Persia, India, the lands beyond the Caspian Sea, and the kingdoms of Europe. The horizon no longer ended at the Yellow River. It now stretched towards places where the names were unfamiliar, but the wealth was unmistakable. The Great Khan had tested his army against one of the oldest civilizations on earth, and it had not only endured, but had triumphed. The cost was high. The blood of warriors, the innocence of cities, the simplicity of the old life, all were spent on the altar of empire. And yet, the hunger remained. The world beyond still waited, and Genghis Khan, forged in exile and honed by revenge, was not finished. The fire was barely cold in the ruins of Zhongdu when Genghis Khan turned his gaze west. China had taught him much, that cities could fall, and that discipline, planning, and ruthlessness could shatter empires older than memory. But he had also discovered something else, an insatiable appetite not just for plunder or power, but for dominion. The conquest of China opened the world to the Mongols, and across the high passes and the sun-scorched deserts of Central Asia lay another prize, rich and glittering, guarded by arrogance rather than strength. That prize was the Khwarezmian Empire. The Khwarezm Shahs ruled a vast territory, stretching from the eastern shores of the Caspian Sea into the fertile plains of Persia. Their cities were old and magnificent: Samarkand, Bukhara, Naisapur, Merv, each a jewel of Islamic civilization, filled with scholars, merchants, mosques, and palaces. Their sultan, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, sat on a throne inherited by conquest and maintained by intrigue. But for all its wealth and seeming grandeur, the Khwarezmian realm was fractured. Its administration was fractured. Its military leadership was divided by jealousies, and at its head sat a ruler whose pride outweighed his wisdom. Genghis Khan did not move on Khwarezm out of greed, at least not immediately. He sought peace. He saw the empire as a trading partner, not an enemy. In 1218, he sent a delegation of merchants, protected by ambassadors, to establish relations. They traveled with goods and gifts, hoping to open a corridor between the Mongol heartland and the markets of Persia. The mission was honest. The response was not. In the city of Otarar, one of the Khwarezmian border governors, a man named Inalchuk, arrested the caravan on suspicion of spying. He seized their goods, imprisoned their members, and eventually had them executed. When Genghis Khan learned of this, he did not respond with immediate violence. Instead, he sent a second delegation, this time 3 trusted envoys, demanding justice. Sultan Muhammad, either from arrogance or fear, made a fatal choice. He executed one of the ambassadors and mutilated the other 2. Their heads were shaven and their beards burned, a deliberate insult in the eyes of the steppe. The message was clear. The Khwarezmian Empire would not be intimidated. Genghis Khan accepted the message and sent one of his own. He summoned his generals. He called up his sons. He assembled the largest army he had ever commanded. The time for peace was over. The time for vengeance had arrived. In the spring of 1219, the Mongol host crossed the Sir-Daria River. It moved like a tide, quiet and relentless. Genghis Khan did not strike at one city. He struck at the empire itself, seeking to shatter it from within. His forces split into multiple columns, each taking its own path across Khwarezmian territory. Cities that once considered themselves impregnable were besieged in a matter of days. Otarar, where the insult began, fell first. It resisted bravely, but the Mongols breached its walls after 5 months. Inalchuk was captured. Genghis Khan ordered molten silver poured into his eyes and mouth, a punishment as theatrical as it was brutal. Next came Bukhara, a city of scholars and wealth. The Mongols approached with speed and deception, feigning retreat before suddenly surrounding the city. The garrison collapsed. Genghis Khan rode into Bukhara not as a raider, but as a judge enacting sentence. He addressed the people in the main mosque, declaring he was sent by the heavens to punish their corrupt sultan. He did not destroy the mosque. He spared the scholars, but he looted the treasuries, dismantled the walls, and scattered the defenders. The sultan had fled rather than defend his people. Samarkand followed, larger, richer, better defended. Its garrison numbered tens of thousands. It fell within a week. The Mongols cut off the water supply, broke the morale, and stormed the gates with siege engines built by Chinese engineers. Upon surrender, the Mongols executed thousands of soldiers. Artisans and engineers were spared, sent back to Mongolia to build the future. The rest were killed or enslaved. The Sultan fled from city to city, his army disintegrating behind him. He crossed the deserts of Persia, pursued by squads of Mongol cavalry. In his last days, he is said to have disguised himself as a commoner, dying in obscurity on an island in the Caspian Sea. The wind that brought the Mongol riders into Central Asia was no longer merely an eastern breeze. It had become a furnace wind, dry and scorching, sweeping across cities that once glittered along the Silk Road like pearls on a golden thread. These cities, above all Bukhara and Samarkand, had stood for centuries as proud monuments to Islamic learning and Persian craftsmanship. But when Genghis Khan came to them, he brought with him a new kind of silence, a silence that follows the fall of worlds. Bukhara, with its minaret and walled gardens, was one of the first to meet the fury of the Mongol host. The siege of Bukhara was short, and that was part of the terror. Genghis Khan rode in not as a barbarian, but as a ruler enacting judgment. When the gates fell and the city lay open, he rode straight into the heart of the city, climbed the steps of the main Friday mosque, and stood on the minbar where imams once delivered sermons. There, in the house of God, he declared his truth. He had not come of his own will, he said, but as an instrument of the heavens. If the people had not sinned, why had their own ruler abandoned them? The words were spoken cold and clear, and they echoed louder than any war cry. The city that was a sanctuary of books and beauty was given over to the flame. Artisans and craftsmen were spared, carried east to build for the empire. The rest, soldiers, officials, rebels, were cut down in the streets. From Bukhara to Samarkand, the Mongols rode to the heart of Khwarezmian pride. The city was larger, richer, better fortified. But Genghis Khan was no conqueror of the old world. He came with precision, discipline, and an army that moved like water. Chinese engineers brought over from the Jin campaigns constructed siege engines. When Samarkand fell, it collapsed like a dying star. Sultan Muhammad fled, abandoning his people. Amidst the destruction, there was a method. The Mongols did not kill indiscriminately. They marked those who could serve the empire. Architects were spared, especially those skilled in domes and mosaics. Smiths and armorers were given tools and orders. Physicians were interrogated and, if found useful, taken into the Khan's service. The conquest was brutal, but not meaningless. Genghis Khan understood that empires are built not only on fear, but on what can be salvaged from the ruins of others. He left governors in the shattered cities, not Mongols, but trusted foreign administrators. The trade routes were quickly restored. Caravans were offered protection, provided they paid tribute. Markets reopened under the gaze of empire. The Silk Road began to hum again, but with submission. The rivers of ash flowing from Bukhara and Samarkand fertilized the roots of a new imperial order. Behind every strategy and proclamation, the core remained unchanged. It was revenge. The campaign was born not of cold ambition, but of fury. The execution of his merchants, the mutilation of his envoys, it had not been forgotten. The Sultan had not just insulted the Khan. He had challenged the entire structure of the Mongol worldview. The eternal blue sky had given Genghis Khan the right to rule. To oppose it was heresy, and heresy required fire. The message spread like smoke across Asia. The Mongols were no passing storm. Their victories were not just battlefield triumphs, but warnings. The Sultan was dead. His empire lay in ruins. But beyond the mountains, new lands beckoned. The Caspian Sea glimmered on the horizon. The Caucasus loomed. The Rus stood in their forests, unaware of the thunder gathering beyond the steppe. Genghis Khan had no map of the world, but he understood one truth. As long as there are kings who consider themselves safe, as long as there are walls that consider themselves strong, there is still work to be done. After Samarkand, Genghis Khan did something unexpected. He did not ride back to his imperial heartland. Instead, he dispatched a detachment of trusted commanders, foremost among them the brilliant general Subutai, west through the mountains and into the lands of the Caucasus. It was not a conquest in the full sense. The army was small by Mongol standards, fewer than 20,000 men, but it was hand-picked and its purpose was clear: reconnaissance in force, a probing of the world's edge. The march across the Caucasus was grueling. Mongol horses bred for the plains struggled across the narrow passes. Yet Subutai was relentless. The Mongols raided Georgian villages, defeated local princes, and fought the mountain tribes who had never seen warriors who moved faster than the wind. Word spread that a new force had arrived, neither Christian nor Muslim, but something entirely different. These riders did not negotiate. They struck and vanished. By 1223, the Mongol forces reached the plains north of the Black Sea, where the rivers ran wide and cold across the lands of Kievan Rus. Here they met a new enemy. The Rus principalities were fragmented, each ruled by its own prince. Yet word of the approaching Mongols caused enough fear to unite them, if only briefly. A coalition was formed, an easy alliance of Rus princes and steppe warriors from the Cumans or Kipchak tribes. Together they marched out to confront the Mongols on the banks of the Kalka River. The Battle of the Kalka River was a slaughter disguised as a campaign. The Mongols feigned retreat, drawing the combined army deeper into the open plains, separating them from their supply lines. When the moment came, they turned and attacked with a fury that shattered the fragile alliance. The Rus forces were encircled. Thousands were killed. The princes who survived were taken prisoner. Some were executed in a manner that was both ritualistic and cruel, pinned beneath wooden planks and slowly crushed while the Mongol commanders feasted above them. It was a message as much as a punishment. Disobedience would be buried beneath the hoofs of empire. Yet, after this great victory, the Mongols did not stay. They turned east and vanished into the steppe as quickly as they had arrived. To the Rus and their neighbors, it was as if a nightmare had passed and then dissolved in the morning light. Many considered it a punishment from God. Others dismissed it as a fluke, a terror that had burned itself out. But they were wrong. The Mongols had not retreated. They had taken the measure of the western lands. They had mapped the weaknesses. They had seen the disunity and the arrogance, and they reported it all back to the Khan. While Subutai scouted the western edge of the world, Genghis Khan himself moved south, following the trail of Jalal ad-Din, the last son of the fallen sultan. Jalal ad-Din refused to die quietly. He gathered what was left of his father's forces and attempted to create a pocket of resistance in the region of modern Afghanistan and northern India. He fought bravely, but Genghis Khan pursued him across rivers and mountains, chasing him from fortress to fortress until Jalal fled across the Indus River into the Punjab. At the ancient river, on the banks of the Indus, one of the most legendary confrontations in Mongol lore took place. As Jalal ad-Din and his followers attempted to cross the raging waters, Genghis Khan appeared on the opposite bank. The two men stared at each other across the river. The Khan is said to have watched as Jalal ad-Din plunged into the waters and vanished into the spray. Genghis Khan did not pursue him. Perhaps he saw in the young prince a fragment of the defiance he once carried in himself. Perhaps it was enough for him to know that the last fire of Khwarezm had been driven from its home. The Mongols would not chase him into India, not yet. Having concluded the Khwarezmian campaign, Genghis Khan turned his army back toward the heart of his empire. He had spent 6 years on campaign. His generals had proven their brilliance. His laws had followed his banners. His enemies were broken and silenced. But victory, he knew, was never permanent. Peace was only the pause between storms. The West had seen the first shadow of the Mongol Empire and trembled. Next time, it would not be a whisper of riders on the horizon, but thunder. The sky above the steppe always belonged to Genghis Khan, but even the greatest of men cannot outrun the horizon. And the end, when it came, was not on a battlefield or in a throne room, but on the rocky slopes of a foreign land. It was the summer of 1227, and Genghis Khan was deep in a campaign against the Shisha, Western Xia kingdom, a realm that had once bowed to his authority and then dared to violate its duty. The Tangut rulers of Shisha had refused support during the Khwarezmian campaign, choosing caution over loyalty. To Genghis Khan, this was betrayal, and betrayal was something he did not forgive. It was during this campaign that the great Khan fell ill. The exact nature of his malady remained shrouded in secrecy. Some claimed he fell from his horse while hunting. Others spoke of a wound. There were whispers of assassination, but no one could say for certain. What is known is that he did not die immediately. His strength began to fade. The man who once seemed carved from stone began to pale and fall silent. But even in decline, Genghis Khan remained the ruler until the end. He issued commands from his tent, his voice firm, though weakened. His sons and generals came to him, receiving the commands that would shape the empire's future. He reminded them of the unity he had forged, of the laws he had carved into the bones of the people, of the need to remain true to the way. He appointed Ogedei, his third son, as his successor, bypassing the eldest in favor of the one he judged most fit to rule not through ambition, but through steadfastness. It was a decision that would bring peace for a time and war in the generations that followed. His death was kept secret. Generals, bound by loyalty and law, concealed the truth even from their own troops. The campaign continued as if led by the Khan's living will. The cities of Shijia fell one by one. The capital, Zhongxing, was taken and destroyed. The royal family was executed. The kingdom ceased to exist. Only when the work was done was the truth permitted to breathe. Genghis Khan was dead. He died weeks before the final victory, wrapped in furs, far from the lands of his birth. The body was returned to Mongolia under heavy guard. The path of the funeral procession was shrouded in secrecy and violence. According to tradition, and perhaps necessity, no one was allowed to know the place of his burial. It is said that soldiers killed all witnesses. Rivers were diverted. Forests were trampled. No tomb has ever been found. Genghis Khan, the conqueror of the world, returned to the earth like any commoner. Only his legend remained above ground. The empire did not collapse after his death. That alone was a measure of his genius. Most empires fracture when their founder falls, but the Mongol Empire held. His sons, trained from youth in war and governance, stepped into his shadow with readiness. The laws he established continued to rule. The system of command he created moved forward with mechanical precision. The armies did not stop. The conquest did not cease. The storm he began continued to roll across the world, carried now by the people who carried his blood and his vision. The empire Genghis Khan left behind was larger than anyone had ever ruled. Its foundation was the will of one man, held together by the fear he instilled, the justice he provided, and the vision he carried like a sword across the heavens. With his death came a silence, and in that silence, the question that has haunted every great realm since the dawn of empires arose: who will take his place? The answer was decided before the last breath left his body. Genghis Khan, with cold and calculated wisdom, had chosen Ogedei, his third son, to inherit the mantle of supreme rule. It was not the obvious choice. His eldest son, Jochi, was the most experienced, but doubts always surrounded his parentage. The second son, Chagatai, was brave but rash and uncompromising, more suited to battle and governance. Ogedei, by contrast, was neither the strongest nor the cunning, but he was steadfast. He had served loyally in campaigns, governed well in the territories assigned to him, and, more importantly, had earned the respect of his brothers and the trust of his father. Genghis Khan once said that a leader should be like a willow in a storm, able to bend without breaking. Ogedei, in the Khan's eyes, was that willow. He could hold the center while others strained at the edges. The decision was made not out of sentiment, but out of a desire to preserve what had been built. It was a political move as much as a paternal one. Yet the succession was not immediate. By Mongol custom, the death of the Khan had to be followed by a Great Kurultai, an assembly of the ruling family and the elite commanders. When the Kurultai finally gathered in 1229, 2 years after Genghis Khan's death, it was a moment weighted with history. The plains echoed with the thunder of horses as the sons and grandsons of the founder assembled beneath the sky. Ogedei was proclaimed the Great Khan, the ruler of all Mongols. He accepted the role with the modest composure that marked his life. He understood that he was stepping into a role forged by a man who was more than a legend. He could not rule as Genghis Khan had by the sheer force of presence. He needed to administer, manage, and adapt. His strength would lie not in conquest, but in continuity. And for a time, that was enough to secure the unity of the realm. Ogedei made concessions. He granted vast tracts of land and autonomy to his brothers and their heirs. He confirmed Chaghatay's rule over the lands of Transoxiana, which allowed him to maintain his authority in the west. Genghis Khan's death had been concealed from the world at first, but now it was known. And in the courts of the east and the west, in Baghdad and Kiev, in Delhi and Constantinople, kings and caliphs listened with bated breath. Would the empire collapse? Would the conqueror's sons devour each other? But the answer came swiftly and with terrifying clarity. No, the Mongols did not retreat. They did not waver. Under Ogedai's leadership, they sharpened their blades again. The conquest resumed. The borders expanded. The silence of succession yielded to the roar of war. The shadow of Genghis Khan remained vast and unyielding. It hung over every decision, every campaign, every act of administration. His name was invoked as a prayer and a threat. Ogedai understood that he was not simply managing a kingdom. He was tending a fire, the flame that the man who changed the shape of the world had lit. In the years that followed Genghis Khan's death, the Mongol Empire did not shatter. It held, it breathed, it expanded, it changed, but it did not fall. That alone was a testament to the strength of the foundation Genghis Khan had laid. His death marked not the end of an era, it marked the beginning of something even larger. Ogedai Khan stepped into power not with a raised sword, but with a seal in his hand and a map before him. Where his father unified and burned, Ogedai planned and organized. He strengthened the foundations of the machine his father built. He expanded the Yam postal system, making it faster, more reliable. He oversaw a census, a monumental task, counting the heads of every person from the mountains of Tibet to the shores of Samarkand. Taxation was refined and registered. Cities that were once smoldering ruins now flourished under Mongol law. Merchants returned to the roads. Caravans moved along the Silk Road again, this time under the banner of the Khagan. It was said that a woman could walk from China to Persia with a gold plate on her head and remain untouched. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, had begun. But peace was only part of the story. The empire remained restless, its borders still hungry. The generals who rose under Genghis Khan were not built for silence. Men like Subutai, who was old but not tired, urged the continuation of campaigns. Ogedai, for all his focus on administration, understood this urge. He did not resist it. Instead, he utilized it. The first true whisper of the Mongol thunder in Europe came not with trumpets and banners, but with smoke rising from distant forests. Rus, a patchwork of feuding principalities, had never faced such a storm. Their princes quarreled over old grudges. Few among them believed the world beyond the steppe could reach them with more than a casual raid. But the Mongols were not raiders. They were something else entirely. In 1236, Batu Khan, Chinggis's grandson and Jochi's son, began his march west. He was young, ambitious, and ruthless. Riding beside him was Subutai. He was now an old man, but still the sharpest mind in Mongol strategy. Together, they commanded an army unlike anything Europe had ever seen. What made the Mongol horde terrifying was its precision. It moved like a blade through silk, quiet and unstoppable. The Volga Bulgars fell first. Then came the campaign into Rus itself. The Principality of Ryazan fell in December 1237. The Mongols encircled it, stormed it, and annihilated it in less than a week. The city burned. Its prince died with a sword in his hand. Few survived. This pattern repeated across the land. Moscow, still a young outpost, was sacked without ceremony. Shuzdal, Vladimir, Torzhok followed. The great cities of Rus, long divided by infighting, stood alone when the Mongol storm swept past. Winter was no obstacle. The Mongols moved across frozen rivers as easily as open steppe. Snow and ice were tools to them. Their horses thrived in the cold. They required no supply lines in the traditional sense. They fed on the land, on their animals, and on the corpses of the cities they left behind. While steadfastness, inherited from his father, and administrative talents, which he developed, were critically important for scaling the empire, Ogedei's main stabilizing factor was his ability to compromise and act as a balancer. Ogedei was not the most formidable or ambitious of the sons, which paradoxically made him ideal for the central authority. Peace among brothers. Ogedei immediately recognized the rights of Batu over the western lands and Chagatai over the central ones, formalizing the division of the empire into uluses, or domains, and thereby preventing an immediate civil war among the powerful brothers. It was a compromise that temporarily forced ambition to work for unity, not against it. Respect for law. His firm adherence to the Yassa and the law of the Kurultai, the 1241 Kurultai, requiring the return of armies from Europe, showed that his authority was based on the law of Genghis Khan, not on personal will. This convinced the feuding branches of the family of the central throne's legitimacy. Building the system. Administrative talents. Ogedei transformed military strength into a sustained state capable of long-term existence. He added more relay stations to the Yam postal system, which made it faster and more reliable, which was vital for connecting the capital of Karakoram with distant parts. Without this, the empire physically could not function as a single unit. Economy and culture. He welcomed all religions and used Chinese and Persian administrators to improve taxation and commerce. Under his rule, the Silk Road reached its safest and most profitable state, Pax Mongolica, which gave the elites of all branches of the empire an economic interest in preserving order. Karakoram. He built Karakoram as a true administrative center, a symbol of Mongol sedentarism, which added stability to the empire in the eyes of the conquered peoples. It was this combination of political moderation and organizational genius that allowed Ogedei to rule until his death and pass on to his heirs an empire that, although it had seeds of future discord, remained unified. In the years following Genghis Khan's death, the Mongol Empire did not fracture. It did not collapse into chaos. Instead, it held. His death marked the beginning of something even larger. Toragene Hatun, the principal wife of Ogedei and mother of his chosen heir, stepped into the void after her husband's death in 1241. She did not raise a sword or wear a crown, yet she governed the empire for almost 5 years as firmly as any man. Toragene was no stranger to court politics. She acted quickly, placing her own people in key posts and removing administrators loyal to rivals. She delayed the Kurultai to consolidate the claim of her son Guyuk to the throne. The Mongol world had long granted women more authority than most civilizations of the time. Toragene was no exception. She managed the treasury and negotiated with ambassadors. In 1246, after a long delay, the Kurultai assembled. Guyuk was crowned and Toragene faded into the background, her work complete. She had shown that the Mongol Empire was not only the legacy of warriors, but the heritage of women with steel in their minds. Guyuk, however, did not prove to be a mirror of his mother. He was cold and arrogant. He died suddenly in 1248. Once again, the throne was empty. This time, Sorfragatani Beki, the widow of Tolui and mother of Möngke, Kublai, and Hulegu, emerged as a kingmaker. A Nestorian Christian, she was educated and politically astute. In 1251, Sorkhagatani engineered the calling of a Kurultai that raised her eldest son, Möngke, to the throne. His election was not without bloodshed. Opponents of the Tolui line were purged. Möngke restored the authority of the central Khaganate and asserted dominance over the vast wings of the empire. He proved to be more than his mother's puppet. He was methodical and deeply committed to imperial unity. Möngke's reign brought a new direction. He expanded the civil administration, focusing on efficiency, discipline, and control. He conducted a census of the entire empire, registering its peoples, wealth, and obligations. Taxes were standardized. The empire began to function not merely as a confederation of conquests, but as a single organism pulsating with a central purpose. But he was not merely a bureaucrat. He, like his grandfather, believed that the empire must grow or die. He planned two great campaigns. One, east, to finally subdue the southern Song dynasty in China, entrusted to Kublai. Two, west, to strike at the heart of the Islamic world and destroy Baghdad, the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, entrusted to Hulegu. Möngke entrusted these missions to his brothers. His reign marked the flourishing of a new generation. These were not the sons of Genghis, but his grandsons. They were raised in the empire, not the wilderness. They spoke multiple languages and read foreign scripts. They represented the empire not only as horses and arrows, but as paper, coin, and law. In his brief reign, Möngke confirmed what his grandfather always believed: the world could be put in order by the will of those strong enough to impose it. The Mongol Empire was not fading. It was evolving, stretching, and rebuilding for the next phase of expansion. The beginning of the end came not with thunder, but with a murmur carried on the wind. The empire, once unified by blood, became too vast, too complex, and too heavy for one Khan to bear. When Möngke died in 1259 during his campaign against the Song dynasty, the silence that followed brought not mourning, it brought war. The succession crisis was immediate and bitter. There was no clear heir. The Kurultai ceased to be a unifying force. Two men emerged as rivals: Kublai, Möngke's brother, who was fighting in China and had begun to adopt Confucian methods of governance, and Erik Bokay, the younger brother, who remained in the Mongol heartlands and advocated for the preservation of the ancient steppe traditions. The war between them was not merely a power struggle, it was a clash of worlds. Kublai eventually emerged victorious. Erik Bokay surrendered in 1264. But the price of victory was measured in more than bodies. It was measured in the irreversibility of the split. Although Kublai was now the Great Khan in name, the other branches of the Mongol Empire, the uluses of Jochi, Chagatai, and Hulegu, no longer looked to Karakoram or Kublai's new capital, Khanbalik, Beijing, as their true center. The illusion of unity had shattered. The empire still called itself one, but it had become a multitude of independent Khanates. To the west, the Golden Horde under Berk Khan had already begun to drift from the empire's core. Berk, a grandson of Genghis, had converted to Islam and viewed the brutal destruction of Baghdad and the massacre of the Abbasid Caliphate by his cousin Hulegu as not merely a political crime, but a religious one. Berk and Hulegu, cousins by blood, became enemies by faith. Their armies clashed along the Caucasus. For the first time in Mongol history, two princes of the House of Chinggis drew swords against each other. The Battle of the Terek River in 1262 cemented the division between East and West. Hulegu, meanwhile, established the Ilkhanate in Persia. He ruled from Tabriz, surrounded by astronomers and philosophers. He dreamed of building a new heart of civilization on the ashes of the old. The Ilkhans adopted Persian styles of administration, married local princesses, and slowly began to merge with the land they had once crushed. But like Berke, Hulegu no longer looked to Karakorum. He ruled in his own name. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Ulus followed its own path, balancing between Islam and old Mongol traditions. It remained a fierce and often unstable region. It never fully accepted the centralized structures that Kublai favored. Thus, the empire divided, not by proclamations or treaties, but by the quiet and relentless march of time. Each Khanate became its own realm. They spoke the same lineage names. They honored Genghis Khan in their rituals and prayers. But their politics, their alliances, their wars were no longer coordinated. They no longer waited for a word from a single center. The dream of a unified world beneath the eternal blue sky faded. Kublai, now emperor of the Yuan dynasty in China, no longer ruled as a nomad, but as a monarch in the style of the Chinese emperors. His court glittered with jade and silk. He completed the conquest of the Song in the south, unifying China. But the more he succeeded in governing China, the more remote he became from the steppe. To the other Mongol Khanates, Kublai was no longer first among equals. He was a Chinese emperor, foreign in dress and in mind. By the end of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire ceased to be a single force. It became four empires, born of a shared storm, but now each drifting in its own direction. The Golden Horde in the north, the Chagatai Ulus at the core, the Ilkhanate in the west, and the Yuan in the east. The unity was gone, and, once broken, it would never return. The moment a rising tide begins to recede is rarely noticed when it first comes. The decline did not announce itself with a final battle, but with 100 small cracks. The empire, once the terror of the earth, did not fall in fire. It faded slowly, inevitably. In China, Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty. He adopted Confucian rituals, but his successors did not inherit his vision. The Yuan court became a palace of factions. Emperors came and went with alarming speed. The Chinese, long resentful of foreign rule, began to stir. Famine and floods devastated the countryside. In 1368, Ming forces seized Dadu, Beijing. The Yuan court fled north, returning to the steppe. The Mongol dream in China was over. In Persia, the Ilkhanate met a different death. It was more protracted and bitter. The descendants of Hulegu ruled with brilliance, sponsoring Persian art and science, and eventually converting to Islam. But they too were not immune to the curse of succession. By the mid-14th century, the Ilkhanate ceased to exist as a unified state. Timur, a man who claimed Mongol descent but was no true Khan, would rise from the remnants and build his own empire. The Golden Horde found itself pinched between its past and its future. It became a tangle of rival Khans. Meanwhile, the Russian principalities, long humiliated, began to gather courage. Moscow, once a vassal, rose to challenge. In 1380, at the Battle of Kulikovo, Dmitry Donskoy routed a Mongol army. It was not the final victory, but the myth of Mongol invincibility was broken. As time progressed, the horde fractured into the white, blue, and great hordes. By the 15th century, the golden horde was gone. Only in the Chagatai Ulus did the Mongol heritage still cling. The Silk Road began to decline as sea routes rose. The era of steppe empires was ending. But if the empire died, its influence did not vanish. The Mongols tore down the walls between East and West. They connected continents, carrying goods, stories, technologies, and beliefs from one side of the world to the other. They destroyed, yes, but they also created. Connected world. Before their arrival, the lands of Asia and Europe were separate worlds. The Mongols changed that. Under their rule, the Silk Road became stable. Caravans could cross Eurasia under the protection of a single imperial authority. The Yam network, the Yam postal station system, became the nervous system of the empire, bringing coherence to a realm of staggering scale. Exchange of ideas. Islam spread deeper into Central Asia. Christian monks traveled east. The Mongols did not enforce one dogma. They allowed many to flourish. This exchange had consequences far beyond the empire. Inspiration for the West. In Europe, the accounts of travelers like Marco Polo opened eyes to lands unknown. That curiosity would eventually lead ships to cross oceans in search of new routes to the east. There were darker legacies too. The same networks that spread culture also spread disease. The Black Death followed the trade routes stabilized by the Mongol conquest. The empires that followed the Mongols carried their imprint. The Ottomans, the Mughals, the Russian Tsars all inherited something from the Mongol legacy, not only in cavalry tactics or court ritual, but in the idea that power, when correctly organized and ruthlessly enforced, can transcend borders and cultures. The Mongol people, once the scourge of the continents, retreated back into the steppe, but their culture endured. They always remembered. The songs of their ancestors told the stories. The wind that once tarried the thunder of their hooves still whispers their names. The history of the Mongol Empire does not end with the collapse of its borders. It ends with a transformation. It became something else. No longer an empire of banners, but an idea. A proof that authority can come not from walls or fleets, but from movement, from a vision, from a will to change the world by the sheer force of belief. Genghis Khan asked for eternal blue sky for unity, and for a time he achieved it. That breath was brief, but it was powerful. And though the empire fell, the wind has not forgotten.